Good evening and welcome. In this presentation, I will be sharing a summary of my research project, which spanned from the spring of 2019 to the spring of 2020 during the ETL 806 course. As you can see, my research focused on elementary classrooms. The title of it, as you can see, is The Effects of Non-Diverse Representation Through Literature and Educators in Elementary School Classrooms. I've focused on elementary-aged English language learners. I chose to work with this participant pool because it is the highest population of the research study setting. So throughout this presentation, I'll discuss various parts of the research study. I chose this study because it personally relates to my education, as I am a diverse person, and based on personal experience, I never had a lot of representation through literature or teachers. So I'm really interested in studying this with this population of students. Introduction. The purpose of this study is to explore the effects of non-diverse literature and non-diverse educators have on populations of diverse students at the elementary age level. As you can tell, this has a really high focus on diversity in this public school setting. As I stated before, diversity is really important to me. So, how diverse is your school? What is the population of diverse students and teachers? Is there an ample amount of diverse literature that correctly represents students at your school? So, the topic of this research study, it can appear to be a slightly broad topic. For that reason, I decided to narrow down on the research questions for the study, and I decided to focus on these two questions specifically. Question 1, how is the lack of diverse representation affecting student learning? And question 2, what is the percentage of diverse students being affected by such lack of diversity? Literature review summary. So after researching and compiling literature available that focuses on this specific topic, I found that the number of articles relating to prior research studies on the specific topic were scarce, and it became difficult to lay a foundation for understanding of the research problem or questions. However, many of the studies that I was able to find did allow me to compile information to set a base for this study. So the various studies examined for the purpose of this research have proven that there is not only a lack of diversity found among educators in public schools, but also a correlation between diverse literature, diverse educators, and student learning and engagement. Studies examined for the purpose of this research have focused on ethnically diverse students, as I mentioned before, specifically of Mexican, Mexican American, and Central American, Latinx or Hispanic background English language learners. As stated previously, the reason for this participant pool is because it is a high population at the setting of this study. So why is this topic important? Why is diversity in education so important? So that there is a lack of educator representation in schools, and there's also a lack of diversity in literature. So research has shown that during the last few decades, U.S. classrooms have experienced dramatic demographic changes. As a result of these demographics, classrooms in the U.S. have increasingly become more diverse. A clear example can be presented through data collected by the National Center for Education Statistics. the number of Hispanic students increased from 9.3 million to 12.8 million during the period between 2004 and 2014. So I know that data dates back to 2014, but if it had increased that much during that period, I imagine that it has increased even more up to 2020. So in regard to diversity in literature, Hughes Hassel presented research that explained how, despite the increasing ethnic and racial diversity in the United States, children of color are rare in transitional books. As Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie noted, there is a dangerous given that no one story can represent an entire group. And for that reason, we need diverse literature in our classrooms to represent each and every child. Methodology overview. So the participants in this research study consisted of 8 to 9 dual language teachers, half of those being native Spanish speakers and the other half being native English speakers. It also consisted of a focus group of approximately 6 to 7 students and parents, grouped separately, of course. So the study focuses specifically on those two questions, the effects of diversity and non-diversity in literature, and then diversity and non-diversity in educators as well. I'll also give you an overview of the data collection tools that were used for this study. Questionnaires and surveys were used, focus group interviews, structured interviews, and observations, along with transcription of notes were used. So this study took place in a highly diverse Title I school located near an urban city. The school population consisted of approximately 75% Latino or Hispanic students, 13.3% white students, 10% African American, and 1.7% other. This is according to the school report card of the year 2020. And I should mention that the population of students on which this study focuses, they take part in what is known as a dual language program, in which students receive 50% of their instruction in Spanish and 50% in English. Therefore, students follow an A-B schedule weekly, in which they spend 2 days with the English teacher and 3 with the Spanish teacher, and the following week it is reversed. Methodology continued. So the type of study that I chose is qualitative study. So a qualitative study was chosen specifically for this research study because I knew that I would be using a small population of students and teachers and parents as well. And this type of study, the qualitative study, works better for this population. So the procedures. Procedures for this study, the data collection took place over a span of 8 to 10 weeks. It consisted of consent and permission forms for all participants, in addition to the principal of the school to allow the research study. Additionally, there was a collection of questionnaire and survey data responses that was given to students, teachers, and parents. Interviews, including interviews to focus groups and individual interviews to teachers, were also taken to complete the research study, and partial observations of identical lessons being taught in dual language classrooms at the same time. Results of the qualitative study. So these two graphs demonstrate the percentage of diverse literature represented in classrooms. The bar graph on the left demonstrates how many books containing diverse characters and stories representative of diverse populations of students can be found in classrooms. So you can see approximately 5 of the 9 teacher responses responded that they have approximately more than 50% diverse literature in their classrooms. On the pie chart on the right in figure 2, this demonstrates the answers that were given by students in grades K through 5 regarding representation of literature in their classroom libraries. They were asked if they felt represented by the literature found in their classroom libraries. As you can see, 40% of students answered that they do feel represented, while 60% of students felt that they don't feel represented in the literature. This graph depicts the total number of engaged participating students versus the total number of students in the class. The blue bars demonstrate how many students were present in class that day, and the red bar represents how many of those students present were engaged in participating in class. You can see it is labeled by grade and whether it is English or Spanish. This data was taken from dual language classes during identical instruction, with the only variant being a different language. This final graph demonstrates the percentage of parent communication for each teacher. So as you can see, data is analyzed from both Spanish and English teachers, and the percentage of parents that are able to have clear communication with the teachers is visibly higher in those classrooms of the Spanish teachers. A lot of this was found to be the language and other communication were the effects in this. So discussion of conclusions. As proven by the data, the lack of representation in elementary classrooms has an effect on student participation and engagement as well as learning. Based on 60% of students in the participant pool that didn't feel represented, an estimated 65% or 422 of the students in this particular school setting or similar would feel represented. So some of the limitations found in the study was that prior research studies on the specific topic were scarce, as mentioned prior. There was also bias visible in the study, both researcher bias and perhaps bias in the entire study, depending on the setting. Additional environmental factors affecting some of the results could be, for example, teaching style that could have affected the observations that took place in those identical lessons being taught. Participant access, as you can see, not all teachers participated in the study. And finally, the time of year. I wish that I could have furthered the study, but given the circumstances of the year and being out of school, that had some implications on the study. Some recommendations would be demographics involving further research needed. So the demographics are evolving, they're constantly changing, so I think there would be further research needed to know for sure if this study could represent other populations with similar demographics. And then teachers were also interested in professional development to better the communication with parents as well. So I have various references in my research study. However, here is a list of what I used in my presentation. Thank you for your time.